How to release old toxic patterns through movement. Okay, so I think this one we covered a bit last week, but a cute question on release old toxic patterns through movement. Okay, uh, all right. So if there's any others, feel free to put them into the chat, and I think I'll weave it into the topic that I wanted to talk on today, which was uh, transformation, or the story work. And all our work has to do with the story work anyway. So, it will just kind of line up, I'm pretty sure. So let's talk about the physical first, because sometimes the physical can actually feel a bit more um, tangible, measurable, accessible. How do you release acute question? The question is acute. Okay. So how do you release all toxic patterns through movement? So if you're moving and moving consciously, and it's kind of like a revision of what I mentioned last week in Satsang as well. If you're doing conscious movement, which is bringing awareness into your body as you're moving and using deep breathing as you're doing your movement, then by virtue of doing that, by bringing awareness into the body, it is going to start to iron out the kinks and start to move energy through. So physically, we might feel it as, tension releasing from the body, things starting to free up, open up, strengthen as well as release. So this is the transformation that's happening on a physical level, which, you know, has an emotional, energetic level. Like you cannot separate that because the body, you can't compartmentalize the body from the mind, from our emotions. So as you're doing um, movement, and I call it conscious movement, as in bringing awareness into the body and areas of the body as you're doing the movement, in particular in our practice, yoga, and using deep breathing, it is actually starting to shift those patterns, all toxic patterns. So the reason I've actually not just, stuck with yoga, or let's call it movement or conscious movement, or not just stuck with meditation, or not just stuck with the internal work, so the story work, which is more on a mind level, and the emotional, energetic work. I haven't just gone with any one of those separately or just chosen one of those because they kind of go together, they work together. So if you're doing movement, like a movement practice, which for us is yoga, conscious movement using a breath, then it makes sense, or I say makes sense, but it actually tends to compress time. It accelerates the journey and the results when there is a way for you to process it on, let's say a different modality. So if you're moving the body, then it helps make sense on the level of mind or emotion, which is why in our body of work, there is this, these four kind of modalities, if you will, that are bringing into our work. Because just, for example, sitting in meditation for many years, not in one shot, obviously, like every day, for whatever period of time every day, um, for me wasn't enough, or just doing the yoga practice, the physical yoga practice for me wasn't enough because there wasn't some way for me to process and, the mind still needs to, on some level, make sense of things and move through the stuff that needs to be moved through, right? So same with if I was just to do, the dialogue work, the intervention work, um, on its own, and I've definitely trained in each of these modalities, right? So one modality where it was just this and very like, Puritan, like just focus on this, I found it wasn't enough. Like I needed to bring in the body work, you know, and just the body and just the mind wasn't enough. Like I needed to do the meditation and start to move things energetically as well. So each of this is a dimension that we add, and each dimension that we add adds an exponential dimension to compressing time, as in speeding up the results. Is what we experience in this physical, um, well, body, but also as this, physical being. So therefore, the transformation, you could say, kind of speeds up. Like it doesn't need decades and decades and decades of it. You'll find that's why in one intervention, like tomorrow we've got, not tomorrow, Sunday, we've got mini awaken, and, someone will share something, and in 1 hour, in one intervention, in one healing session, someone can shift a lifetime of stuff around that area, right? So these, in my opinion and experience, all go hand in hand. They go together. And therefore, when they work together, you have multiple dimensions of transformation at play and taking effect in your life. Whereas when I found that I was just doing postures for, I don't know what, like a couple of decades, and there wasn't a way for me to process it. There wasn't a way, not just to make sense of it, but to actually move through the stuff that needed to be moved through. And yes, on one level, my mind needed to understand certain things, right? And if I was just limiting myself just to understanding, like I need to understand everything, I need to make sense of everything, that's also limiting myself. And at some point, that stops being useful. I feel like not I feel, I know from my experience of working with people, each of these has a place in someone's healing journey. So coming back to your question of how do you release, old toxic patterns through movement, I would say movement is really powerful. Each of these are really powerful, but when you bring it together with these other dimensions, it speeds things up. And not just speeds things up, sometimes makes things it brings a level of ease to it, a certain level of effortlessness to it. Because maybe on a physical level, if you're just trying to move it through on a physical level, it might take a lot of effort and time, which may be okay on one level, but then on another level, it's like, okay, how much longer is this going to take? When am I going to get to the shift, the healing, the transformation, that I'm seeking? Um, so how does it tie into the topic that I wanted to at least touch upon today? The patterns, what you're talking about, patterns is um, patterns in the mind, like thought patterns, and you can say the narrative, the mind narrative, which we call, the story. And you could say there's a core story that is running us. And then the core story has kind of, you could say like, a tree has branches, or like layers. And sometimes one story can have many layers like an onion. And which kind of touches upon Emma's question, like, would I keep hitting the same thing over and over again? And it can seem like that in the journey of life or transformation, which is about life. Um, we have this analogy in our work, which is like this multi-story car park. And it can see on like, or like a spiral. Like sometimes I've had this experience where it's just been like a spiral. And, the spiral can sometimes feel like I'm not going up, I'm actually going down, like backwards. And it's like, hang on, I've done that. And then it's like, but I've already done that. But I've already done this work. But hang on, I thought I've already done this several times. And it feels like the same point, but actually, I've gone around and come around, and it's like I've hit what looks like the same, but I'm at a different level. I'm at a deeper level, or maybe if you look at the car park, like you're going up, you're just at the next level. So it can seem sometimes when you're doing this work, like, when is this ever going to go away? Um, it's just that you're going deeper and it looks like the same thing. I've had that many times in my journey. And I thought, I've worked on this so many times. Like, when is this freaking going to go away? It's like, is this even working? Am I wasting my time, my years working on myself? Yeah, it's working. It's just that all of that work that I did before has prepared me for the next level. And then this work that I'm doing now is preparing me for the next level. So all the work that you've done before is preparing for what you're upon now in your life. All the internal resources, all the evolution that you've gone through as this physical being and also this energetic being, like this soul. So your question, Emma, I'm now jumping around the questions. I'm guessing was more like on an energy and like an energetic level as well, like on a soul level. I go through these cycles and I'm having these lessons. Will they ever go away? And from my experience of it, I would say that, okay, now I'm talking energetically. Okay, so I'm talking about soul and energetic. So again, when I say that, that means if you think of it from a logical point of view, I am going to sound like I'm crazy, which I don't know, maybe I am, who knows? On an energetic level, on a soul level, it is the soul is actually gaining virtues. It is learning, is evolving. So therefore, until the lesson is learnt, a lot of times we keep getting the lesson in different ways. And, it chose to learn the lessons that it wants to learn. It's meaning the soul. And as a human being, sometimes we will experience some of these lessons that the soul is learning in very intense, ways, like very, very difficult and intense ways. But if you think about on a soul level, a lifetime is just a drop in the ocean, right? It's just like a quick moment, you could say, a glimpse. But what we're experiencing in this physical life, a lifetime feels really long for us. But for a soul, because, all times here and now, it's like it's just quick, you could say. So what we are experiencing very intensely and maybe even painfully may not be seen as that because on a higher, on a higher plane of existence, there isn't that. We just experience it as a human being. So some of these lessons can be really difficult and challenging. And this is where, if you're trying to do it on this level, on this physical plane of existence, it takes much more time and it takes much more effort because it takes time to move a particle from A to B. And the only way you can actually get the result quicker is to accelerate the particle, right? Move it faster. So that's why we tend to push and shove and fight and, struggle and hustle and all that sort of stuff. Whereas when you shift into the energetics, which is actually why we've got this dimension as well, like the healing work, the energy work in our body of work, at some point, there's only so much you can do on a body level. There's only so much you can do on a mind level. And at some point, you switch into the energy work. And that's where, one healing can shift one or several lifetimes of stuff. So when you're talking about, soul lessons and things like that, like you're marking, you're actually downloading it, you're actually clearing the beliefs and you're integrating the learnings and marking them complete before you move on right to the next. And again, I'm speaking energetically, so it's going to sound like I'm crazy if you're thinking of it from a logical point of view. It's like, what? What's this guy talking about? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys because you've all been around this work for some time. That's at least my experience of the question that you're asking. Um, your question, Lizzie, is more on the level of the mind, and you're saying, I keep these things like the 24-hour out of office to self, which is actually a good thing if you're quite impulsive and just like reactive, right? It's good to kind of put things on the list and just sit with it. So good that you've got a system which is like 24 hours. And does it block creativity? I mean, who's in control of the process? It's funny, like you put the thing in place and then you're like, oh, but I've limit, it's limit, this thing has limited me, but you created it. It's like, okay, if it doesn't work, change it. So if you want to have some room for creativity, then go ahead and, and create that space for yourself, give yourself the permission. And it's also a question of like the question under the question is, can I have permission to do it this way? It's like, well, yeah, why not? Like you're the one who created this, so you can change it if you want. How do I know when I act on that creativity immediately, or need to put it down? I don't know. Like, I would say for me, like, whatever the thing is that I am either, reacting upon or sitting on and then, taking action on, maybe one filter could be like, how does this actually align with what my life is about or what I want my life to be about? And does it really matter? Or am I just wasting my time, my energy, my space? So it comes back to intentionality, which we've talked about in other sessions. So what is the bigger intention? What is my bigger why? And what am I up to in this life? And does this thing even matter? And maybe part of your thing, your why might be like about creativity or fun or expansiveness or exploring, life and its dimensions. And it's like, okay, cool. Then maybe you want to create some space for that. But part of the question is also your favorite answer, which is come out of your head, because you're trying to solve it very much in your head. It's like it's a very, kind of like a heady question, which is okay. Obviously, it has time and place. Let me see if I answer the question. I feel like at the moment it's gone now somehow. My question is, how do I know if I act on that creativity immediately? Need to put it down, come back to it. I haven't regretted adding something to the list, but I've regretted not adding it to the list. So then maybe there's, your answer is there as well. Like put it on the list then, because maybe what you're working through right now is actually being very impulsive and reactive on things, and until such time you can be much more thoughtful and intentional. Um, you know, maybe that's what you're learning underneath this. And until you can, not be so strategic and measured, which is the other extreme, maybe you might hit that extreme at some point and then it's time to pull it back. So here's the kind of in internal work, perspective of it, I would say. When we learn something new, so like, let's say you're learning to maybe, let's call it not be reactive or impulsive. The first thing might be like you would just, go too much this way. And then you'll start to work in the opposite end of the spectrum and you go too much the other way. So you really cut yourself down, or like you really start to like get discipline, let's say, put it on the list. But then you put everything on the list so much that there's no room for any creativity, no room for any like being in the moment in life, let's say, which is you could say is the other end of the extreme. And we tend to hit the extremes. And then as you work on, refine, and calibrate, you'll tend to then find like a middle ground. I've talked about this when it comes to do with yoga and teaching yoga, but actually in almost any skill or area that we are learning or growing in, one of the ways we learn is that we go too little, too much, too little, too much, too little, too much, too little, too much, and then eventually we kind of like calibrate and we work out like, okay, this is a good kind of medium ground that I can work on, or like, above average, like, this is my level that I want to be in, when that is, let's say, the two ends of the extreme of the thing that you're learning. Um, so there's my inner work perspective on that question, and I hope that's useful.